Hi everyone, and welcome to the CPP Education Team's Ask an Expert webinar, New MBTI and Strong Products for Enhanced Interpretation Sessions. We have about 545 people registered today. My name is Karen Gonzalez, and I'm the Associate Marketing Manager here at CPP. I'll be moderating today's webinar, and we'll be introducing our featured speaker, Judy Gruder, in just a bit. But first, I'd like to do a quick walkthrough of the webinar format for those of you who may be joining for the first time. Today's webinar will run for approximately 90 minutes. During the presentation, if you have questions, please submit them to me using the question function in the webinar controls. Judy will be pausing throughout the webinar today to answer your questions, and I'll give everyone a chance to send them in during the breaks. 3 representatives from CPP are here today. We have Janelle Rohr, Jim Larkin, and Jack Powers, and they'll be available to answer questions as well. As with all of our webinars, today's webinar is being recorded, and we'll be sending out a link to the recording in approximately 2 weeks. Please note that the PowerPoint slides are not available for the Ask an Expert series. Now I'd like to introduce our expert. I'm very happy to welcome as CPP's Ask an Expert, Judy Gruder, GS Principal and Trainer. Judy has been a Career Development Program Consultant and Trainer for more than 35 years, as well as a National Certified Counselor and NCDA Master Career Counselor. She's a recognized authority on the uses of assessments in career counseling and is co-author of a number of publications and reports on the Strong Interest Inventory, such as the I Start Strong report and Myers-Briggs tools. Don't forget to join us for our live tweeting at twitter.com/CPPeducation using hashtag CPPAAE. Now please join me in welcoming Judy, and now I'd like to turn over the webinar to her. Welcome, Judy.
Thanks, Karen. Hi, everybody. We're going to take kind of a different tack today and look at some MBTI and Strong products that are designed specifically for college and career counseling practitioners. As I'm going through some of these products, I'm also going to talk about some interpretation strategies and invite you to please text in your questions so that we can address the way that you would be using the products. We'll start with the MBTI College Profile and Interpretive Report, and then we're going to go through MBTI Complete for College. MBTI Complete is a form of the MBTI that includes a feedback session, an interactive feedback session. It's actually the standard for providing feedback on type. And even if you're not using it, the content of MBTI Complete is really helpful in guiding us through the feedback sessions when we're working one-on-one or with groups with students. We're going to look at the MBTI Step II and how it's used in college settings. The Step II is an expanded interpretation of type that has many potential uses on college campuses. We'll also look at some books that tie type specifically to college majors and occupations. These are the books that academic advisors and career counselors really don't want to be without because they give the concrete information that students are looking for. And finally, you're going to be the first to see the updated combined MBTI and Strong Career Report that's due out in a couple of months. Actually, this year we're celebrating the 70th anniversary of the MBTI instrument. Sometimes I feel like I've been with it the whole time, but not quite. But this year is the 70th anniversary, and it seems like a really good time to look at these important products and talk about how we might use them. We're starting off with the most basic. This is the MBTI College Profile, and we're going to build from here. This is the basic MBTI profile in its college format, and the first thing it does is provide an overview of what type is, presented briefly with some color, some visual to engage people who are reading it. And then it zeroes in on the students' reported preferences. In this case, they're indicated in blue, E, N, F, and P. Then the profile provides actual PCIs. Just a reminder that preference clarity indexes are not measures of preference amounts. They demonstrate how frequently or how consistently students answer the questions in one direction or the other. They're not scores, we don't call them scores, and they're not treated as scores. Actually, we're going to talk about, we're going to pause in a few minutes and actually leave some time for discussing this because it's such an important concept as we move through all the MBTI products. Typically, PCIs higher than 5 are very reliable. If the student takes the MBTI again, they're likely to remain the same. Slight preferences, those lower than 6, will often require more discussion, more activities during the type verification process in order to clarify them. If you have any questions about PCIs, send them in to Karen, text them into Karen so we can address them when we pause after the interpretive report. The profile itself concludes with a description of the whole type. It's bulleted out. If ENFPs out there, I hope you recognize these bullet points and say, ah, that's pretty much what I'm about. Now, the college interpretive report builds on the information that's provided in the profile, and it presents it a little bit differently. It begins with the whole type. The actual PCI profile doesn't come until the very end of the report. This report can be rescored for a different type if a student verifies a different type during the feedback session. Or in some cases, you actually may already have the student's type from a previous assessment or activities that you've done or from a class that they've been in. If that's the case, you'll get a different comment here. It says you verified that your best fit type is ENFP. So they're either going to get their reported type or their verified type, depending on how much discussion has gone on before this report is presented. And this is how each of the preferences are explained, highlighting those of the respondents. And here we have ENFP again. And then a description of the whole type is included that's much more extensive than what we saw on the profile. It actually includes information about how they make decisions, how they learn best, potential blind spots. When I'm using this report with students, I don't just give it to them to read, especially if I'm working with extroverted students. I read through this with them. So it becomes more of a basis for discussion than just handing it to them and saying, here, read about your type and see if you agree with it. Now, this report includes information about type dynamics, just a very simple explanation. This part talks about the 4 mental processes. And then it goes on to actually talk about the dynamics, which of the mental functions is used in the outer world, the inner world, etc. It's presented very simply. This usually isn't a point of a lot of discussion during a feedback session, but at least it's an introduction to it, and it's presented simply enough that students who are just being introduced to type can usually understand and identify with it. We're going to pause for just a minute after the next slide if anyone needs some clarity about PCIs. The last thing that appears in the interpretive report for the college interpretive report for the MBTI is the actual PCI profile that we saw previously in the report. That's just the 2-page profile by itself. At this point, does anyone have any questions about PCIs? I'd really like you to be clear about what these numbers mean, how to talk about them with the people that you're verifying with. Anything, Karen?
Not yet. Haven't seen anything come in.
That's a good sign. Everybody has total mastery of PCIs. I love it. Okay. We can talk about them later, too, because it'll come up as we talk about a couple of other products.
Natalie came in. She asked, when you read it with them, do you mean you actually read it out loud? She's asking about if you can kind of go over the validity again.
For instance, when we're talking about this page, is that what she's referring to?
Yeah.
I might say, let's talk about how you make decisions. Typically, ENFP types value harmony and goodwill, like pleasing people and accommodate others' needs, etc. So I'm using that paragraph as a reference, and then I would pause and say, can you give me an example of a decision you've made? And let's talk about how personal values and empathy with others played a part in that. But then I would also ask if they've gone in the other direction in making decisions if they see the thinking preference coming in as well. I always want to emphasize that a 4-letter type doesn't limit us to those 4 letters. It's just our home base. It's our favorite place, our most comfortable spot. But all types use all preferences. And I would do that actually with each one of these paragraphs if I have time. In many cases, what I see practitioners do is they interpret the profile, the PCI profile that comes later that we saw, and then give them the interpretive report as backup. But when we're doing that, we've already discussed most of what's in the interpretive report. We just haven't been referring directly to the words on the page. And that's just my way of doing it. There are 2 things that come into play: the style of the practitioner and how comfortable you are talking without looking at printed words or printed descriptions. But you also have the type of the student to consider. And introverted types really want to see the written word, and they want to pause and not hear us talking while they digest some information. So talking about it and then showing it to them and giving them a minute to reflect on it can really be helpful, literally paragraph by paragraph. Anything else? Thank you, Natalie, for asking that.
Yeah, I mean, just a few people have asked basically how, kind of what you're saying, but if you have examples or words of how you explain it. For example, I had 7 wrote in, many of my students have slight to moderate PCIs. How to best discuss this with them? And then I have Kevin who asked, how is the PCI shown when someone has verified their type rather than the report generated from taking the assessment?
Good question. And Jack, please correct me if I'm wrong, but if you verify a different type, that statement comes up that you have verified your type as whatever, but the PCI section does not appear at all.
That's correct.
So it's just not there. The discussion of slight PCIs is really important. And the first thing that comes to my mind is we don't want to give them incorrect information. A slight PCI doesn't mean they have equal preferences. It doesn't mean that they access both preferences equally. It means that they're not sure of their preference. And when what I say to them, first of all, I tell them what it is. If they've got a preference, especially around a 1 or a 2, that very slight, hugging the midpoint, I'll say, when you answer the questions that had to do with decision making, thinking versus feeling, you split your answers, you split your votes, and you answered half in one direction and half in the other direction. And I'll stop right there and ask them to talk to me about a decision they've made and ask them which one feels more comfortable. Now, what's important about these functions and the functions are SN and TF, is that preferring one doesn't exclude the other. It just suggests where we go first. For instance, if SN is in question and hugging the middle, what I try to do is describe S and describe N as different ways that we gather and process and take in information. And people who prefer intuition tend to start with a possibility, start with a big picture, and then they'll go to sensing to fill in the blanks. It's like starting with a hypothesis and then getting your data. People who prefer sensing start with the information, they start with the data, and they build to possibilities. So we're always doing both. It's more or less the order that we do things in. Usually when we clarify that and explain to students that this isn't quantity, it's just how many times you answered in each direction, they'll feel more comfortable and say, well, you know, now that I think about it, I usually do go to intuition first. But you know, I've kind of been told throughout school that isn't right, that I'm supposed to have concrete data. So they're answering somewhat out of their natural preference and somewhat out of what they've been socialized to do. You just want to make them feel comfortable with that. Try to bring them to the point of verifying what their most natural preference is. We're also going to talk about in just a few minutes about actually what the process of verifying type looks like. And something that I always want to stress is that a person's self-selected type is every bit as valuable and important as what you see here in PCIs. And they don't even see the PCIs until after they self-selected. So if you take them to a point of self-selection before they see this, then you use that as your reference point. I hope I did that without confusing people, but this business is very, very important. Students see low scores and high scores, and they just attribute all kinds of stuff to that just isn't there. Anything else, Karen?
Yeah, Cassandra sent in, Cassandra asked, regarding clarity index, I have heard people say they're very clear intuitive versus slight, or sometimes even here, I'm more of an introvert because I'm very clear. How should we respond?
That's what I'd like to move away from, that a high number, a PCI of 22 on extroversion isn't any more extroverted than a PCI of 12 or 2. All it is that the person is clearer. They're more certain of their preference for extroversion. That's why it's called an index of clarity. They're more certain, they're more clear at 22 than they are at 2. And it's when you hear people say, I'm more extroverted than you are because I have a higher number, if you feel like it's a teachable moment, then it might be the time to explain what PCIs are. But if it's not a teachable moment, I usually don't confront people when they say that. I try to ask them questions to take them to what it really means. But it's a common misconception.
Okay. Thanks, Judy.
Anything else?
Let's see. Matthew asked, are you supposed to show the PCIs before you have the student self-select?
No. No, the self-selection always comes first. And we're going to talk about that in just a couple of slides. In fact, the next slide.
Great.
So thank you for providing that excellent transition, Matthew.
Thanks, Judy.
So are we okay, or is there something else on PCI? We okay?
You know what? Actually, I just got one that came in from Paul. Paul says, since PCIs don't change the results overall in the rest of the report, what is the rationale for including them?
Oh, such a good question. You know, I've been using type now for 40 years, and there have been times when reports have been issued without PCIs, and there is a school of thought that they're not necessary. Practitioners, however, do prefer to have them. I'm not sure they're as useful for the student, but for the practitioner, it really tells us before we start providing feedback on type where the discussion points are going to be. For instance, with this one that we're looking at, it's a fairly clear ENFP. I know that this feedback session is probably going to be fairly brief. I'll be able to just present a few descriptions of each of the preference pairs, and they're going to verify. But if I see a slight function, a slight PCI in the middle, SN or TF, and then I see a slight orientation, either EI or JP, it kind of guides how I'm going to present the feedback session. It's sometimes there's a clue, in fact often there's a clue in the PCIs to start with JP in your feedback. If I have a slight JP, I always start there because JP determines the dynamics of the whole type, how SN and TF are used, whether they're extroverted or introverted. And if SN or TF is slight, I'm also going to start with JP because I want to get that JP down first before I start giving examples of SN and TF. Now, I know with this type, since P is fairly clear, it's pretty dependable, we're going to be talking about extroverted intuition and introverted feeling. And that's very different than it would be if it were an ENFJ or if that were unclear. So the PCIs I find to be more valuable for me than the student. And if anyone else has comments about that, please jump in with them because that's an interesting question. And since the publisher's listening, it makes a difference what you think about that. Should we move to the next one, Karen?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Thank you.
We're going to talk about actually the process of verifying type. As I just said, providing students with a report of their results is almost the last step in verifying type. It's only one step in the process of interpreting the MBTI assessment. And it is a process. Reported type, how the student actually comes out, is always treated as an hypothesis to be explored. It gives you, the practitioner, points of starting points, but it doesn't tell the person their type. And we never treat it as just test and tell. Type verification actually begins with demonstrating what preferences are and differentiating them from traits. The examples that we use most often are things like having students write their name with each hand or folding their arms, and making sure that students understand that just like hands and arms, we use all of the preferences at different times in different ways. We just have preferences, just like handedness. And then you explain each preference pair and have students self-select. Keep in mind they haven't seen their results yet. You would encourage examples of each preference in each pair from their own lives. So you might explain T and F, and then ask the student to think of a time when they used a preference for thinking when making a decision, and how feeling then played a part, or vice versa. When you have students and respondents who have a lot of work experience, you might have them talk about how the different preferences play out at work. And there are many type publications, including the manual and Introduction to Type, that include a list of how the preferences are used in different work situations. And only then do you bring their reported type out and talk about that. And use all of these different ways of talking about type to arrive at their best fit type. And then you finally confirm that by looking at type descriptions, their best fit, as well as any others that may be suggested by their self-estimated, their work situations, or their reported type. This is how it might look on paper, and I usually have a piece of paper out when I'm verifying type with someone, so that we can actually write down their self-estimate, how they see themselves at work, at school, what their reported type, and then what their overall best fit type is. And sometimes we'll just look at their self-estimate or their reported type and say, I know it. I just know I'm an ENFP type. I don't care what all the data say. You'll hear that. And other types will add up each column and see which letter shows up the most often and take that as their best fit type. And you can probably guess which types are more likely to use which approach. But it doesn't matter which approach they use. What you're trying to do is bring them to a best fit type so that they can say, this type describes me best. I do want to say, though, that when you're providing feedback on type, you don't want to force it. You don't want to push it. I want people to be comfortable knowing that they can use all 8 preferences, and hopefully we'll be able to see which ones they prefer. But if they don't, I'm not going to nail them to a chair and keep them there for 6 hours while we explore every single possibility we possibly can. It's perfectly okay to say, for now, that's a question mark. We'll come back to that later. We can talk about it after you've had a chance to look over some other things. So you want to try to get them to best fit type without forcing it. Now, the type verification process is most often experienced face-to-face. It's either in a one-on-one or in a group interpretation session. But it can also be done voice-to-voice by telephone. I do a lot of them image-to-image, as in video or web conferencing. The key point is that they're done in real time with both the practitioner and the respondent actively involved. There's only one exception that does not require the actual presence of the practitioner, and that's the form of the MBTI that's called MBTI Complete. Some of you may have already seen it or used it, but a lot of college people haven't. And this is a good time to experience MBTI Complete and also see the reports that come out of it. Now, in order to access MBTI Complete, students take the regular MBTI Form M at Skills 1 just like they would for any other report. And the assessment is then followed by a built-in interactive type verification process where they're interacting with the computer just like they would be with you. And I can think of a lot of uses for this format, but the two that come to mind right away are settings where there isn't time for personal feedback and settings where certified practitioners are not available to provide feedback. At GS, we use it in the online MBTI certification program, and it's proved to be a very effective introductory module to the program. And what's really been interesting to me is that in the certification program, participants have more than 30 hours of learning, reflection, and interaction with their instructor after they do MBTI Complete. And at least 95%, I think even more, wind up actually agreeing with the type that they initially verified when they did the MBTI Complete process. So in our program, they take it, and then we discuss it, we explore, and they are verifying what they've initially verified. That says a lot for the process itself, how it's been written, and how it's delivered. I wouldn't use it if it didn't. And once Form M has been completed, students are taken to the interactive learning session, which is actually type verification. I'm going to show you some pieces of it just to demonstrate how it works. It's actually more extensive than it is here. With the participants in our program who are taking it, I asked them to actually set aside an hour and a half to take the MBTI and then go through the learning session so that they're doing it all in one session. Of course, they don't often need that much time, but that's about the same amount of time that you would spend administering and then providing feedback if you were doing it personally. The first part of the interactive session presents the 4 MBTI dichotomies as the 4 building blocks of personality. It's a tutorial about what personality type is. You'll recognize these 4 building blocks as SN, TF, EI, and JP, which are then defined. At the end of each section of the interactive session, students are given the opportunity to review anything that they don't understand before they continue. And then the next section of the interactive learning begins where the previous one left off, with an overview of the preference pairs and general characteristics of each preference. And then giving them a picture, giving them the graphic of a type table with all 16 types. And by clicking on any type in the type table, they can see what the letters stand for. It shows up in that empty space at the bottom. Now they actually go through the comparison of their self-selected type and how they came out on the instrument itself. They're taken through each dichotomy beginning with SN and TF, what the program refers to as the core building blocks of personality, what you probably heard me refer to as the heart of type. Characteristics of each preference are provided. These are really clear descriptions of S and N. I'm giving you just a little time so you can scan it. And then more information about what S and N look like when they're actually doing something, the questions that S and N tend to ask. Now for each preference, after students have gone through this piece, they're asked to actually check their understanding, in this case of sensing and intuition. And if they give the wrong answer, they're kind of gently corrected with a sorry. Now for each preference pair, at this point, the student is then asked to select a preference based on what they now know about the pair. Their self-selection is then compared to the reported results. Do you see that? You can see that little diamond in here, right here. How they actually came out on the MBTI instrument. This student's self-selection of N and reported preference for N are the same. But also in this case, the student self-selected a preference for thinking, but indicated a moderate preference for feeling on the indicator. So this is pointed out. Now the same person self-selected extroversion, which agreed with her reported results, and self-selected perceiving. Now it turns out that her estimated type is slightly different from her reported type. This is very often what happens when you're face-to-face doing a one-on-one or even in a group session. So here we have ENTP as self-selected and ENFP as how they came out on the indicator itself. It's pointed out that this isn't a problem, and it's I want to reinforce that the estimated type, the self-selected type, is considered to be every bit as important as the reported type, and both are considered when determining best fit. Now we're given the opportunity to choose which type fits best, either the self-selected ENTP, how they came out, ENFP, or neither. I'm just not sure yet. Now, if they're not sure, descriptions of all 16 types are presented, and they're asked again to choose their best fit. And this student selected ENFP. And she's now given the opportunity to download a PDF of the ENFP type description. Excuse me just a minute, I need to clear my throat. It's all right, that's what happens when introverts talk too much, their throats dry up. Okay. This type description that she's going to download is targeted especially to college students. If you're using MBTI Complete with other clients, they'll get a more general description to download. But this one you'll see is specifically for college. We're going to look at the PDF that college students can download, which is the new product, then talk about when you might use it in your own work settings.
Judy, could I just jump in for one thing?
Please.
Just to note,
yes.
When the client gets to this point, it will be good for them to note their user ID, because they will be able to log back in and see this report again if they fail to download it or need to see it again.
So this section that's bolded right in the middle of the slide.
Right.
And it says it. Write it down, keep this number. Yeah. Yeah, in fact, we have Noreen who works with GS, who's practically full-time looking up IDs and providing them just to people so they can get back in.
Exactly.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Thank you. And when they download the PDF, this one is she's downloading ENFP because that's the type that she verified as her best fit type. It starts out with a general description of the type, if you are like most ENFP types. I'm leaving it up just for a minute because this is new. We haven't seen this before. Then it follows with the flip side, the potential pitfalls of the type and some overall descriptors. Now, if this audience is like most of our webinar audiences, there are probably a lot of ENFP types out there reading this, and what I always have clients do is highlight things that really describe them. And in fact, I make a difference between T and F. If I have a student or a client that's a feeling type, I'll have them take a colored highlighter and highlight everything that they really own. If they're a thinking type, I'll give them something to write with and have them cross out something they don't agree with. It tends to go with the type that T's cross out and F's highlight. Now the PDF goes on with some guidance for choosing a college major, some key points to consider, and some typical fields of interest for the type. Really good thing to consider if you're helping them to choose college majors. You have the tips on what they want to consider as well as some typical fields, but certainly not exclusive. and then some information about how the type, in this case ENFP, likes to learn and study, and even what kind of faculty appeal to them the most. And some information about getting along with other students and roommates, and activities they might enjoy. What is likely to cause stress and how to deal with it. And even how they might prefer to deal with technology. And finally, working with others on projects or teams. Now, something that, as I was putting this together, and remember, I had not seen this before. This is coming out shortly, but it hasn't been released yet, this particular version of MBTI Complete. As I was working through this presentation and going through the prototype of the report for the first time, my head was clicking away about how these various sections that I just showed you could be used in group activities. If I were teaching a career exploration class, or if we had a workshop, I think I would break students up into groups and have them address different sections of this PDF, and then compare and contrast with the whole group, so they can see how how the others do things, how others learn, and how others study, and how others get along, and what they're looking for in roommates, etc., and compare them as they're learning about themselves. I want to take a breather here and answer any questions. Maybe talk about how you see this MBTI product, MBTI Complete, being used in college settings, or any questions you might have about the type verification process itself. And Karen, I'm looking for anything that might have come into you up to this point.
Okay, so we've got a few. Let's see here. Rosie had asked this question kind of towards the beginning, but she asked, what do you think about online classes that do, I'm sorry, let me start over. What do you think about online classes that do interpretation online?
I think I'd have to see the format. If they're using, if I were teaching it online, which I do, the MBTI certification program, we use this product so that I know that the interpretation that they get is standardized and follows the words and phrases that have been identified by research as clearly describing each of the types. And I think that's what's important. So I would want to see the content of how type is being, I'd need to see the process. It can be done. It can be done.
Great. Tamison sent in, I often get students who say I behave one way at work and another in other areas of my life. How do you deal with that?
I usually start talking about energy. Where do you feel the most energized? When you're using these preferences that we've talked about at work, or when you're in these preferences outside of work? One thing that I found, and again, I have an interesting database because we've had over 3,000 people complete the online certification program, and I've been interacting with most of those people one-on-one, so I'm able to ask a lot of questions. And one of the things I found is that very often it goes back to how the instrument is administered in the first place. We have to be very careful about saying, answer the questions according to how you're the most comfortable. We don't want to say, answer the questions according to the way you are at work, or answer the questions when you're not at work. We don't want to make that distinction. Because what I found is that thinking types are very often most comfortable at work, and they use their less preferred preferences or the less natural preferences outside of work, and vice versa. Feeling types will often say that they use their less preferred, less comfortable preferences on the job, and then when they're outside of work they go to what's more natural. So I explore that with them. But almost everyone can say, I feel energized when I'm doing this. And then you focus in on, okay, is that work? Is that not work? That's just my perspective on it. Mind you, there are as many people as there are, many ways of doing this as there are practitioners, I'm sure.
Thanks. Kelly Swinton, I've had students respond to the potential pitfalls as sort of offensive. The majority feel it is helpful to be shown this, but some have actually considered it mean. What is the best way to respond to this reaction?
Oh, I've actually never experienced that. And in fact, sometimes the pitfalls are what people identify with, and that's what they use to actually verify their type. I think I would respond, first of all, out of empathy, and say, I can understand how you might feel that way. Let's talk about how you might have experienced them or not. They're not here for you to necessarily agree with or disagree with, but are there any that you recognize? And point out that if they do pop up in the future, they're aware of them. Whenever someone comes at me with a negative response, I first agree with their feelings, and then try to turn it around and make it more personal for them. Good question. I wrote it down to explore it some more.
Great. Another one is from Tibalt. What are the typical fields of study for each? I'm sorry. How are the typical fields of study for each MBTI type determined?
Well, the, CPP has a very large data bank, as does CAPT, and there's also a lot of journal research that's been published. What we're going to look at a publication in a few minutes, in fact, that actually gives us type tables for different majors, and we can see that the 4 hearts of type, the ST, the SF, the NF, and the NT, are attracted to quite different fields of study, and they're determined because we ask them. We obtain their type, which would be in one of the data banks, and ask them what their major is or what they majored in and what career field they entered, and whether they're satisfied with the career field. So it's a numbers thing.
Great. Here are some product-related ones, and I'm going to ask because I know they're going to keep coming up. So here's one. If clients have an older report, how do they get the new report?
Jack, Jim?
If clients have an older report, how do they get a newer report? Meaning,
so if they took the MBTI Complete in its old format and now they want the college format, maybe?
That's a good question. Let me track down the answer to that, and I'll have an answer before the end of the webinar.
I can say that it would be quite different than it is for something like the Strong. If someone has an old Strong and you now go in and rescore it for the new Strong, it's just a rescore. Mm-hmm. It's right. A repeat. It's not, there isn't an additional charge. But MBTI Complete is different. It's much more than just a report. It's an entire interactive session. And Jack, my gut tells me that in order to get the report, you have to go through the whole session, and you can only do it once.
That is true, Judy.
So,
yeah, with that in mind, I suspect that it will be an additional charge to take the MBTI Complete for college.
Yeah, they'd have to do it again. And since Jim brought up the ID number thing, and Jim, maybe you know this, once a person has taken all of MBTI Complete and printed their PDF, can they go back in with their ID number and access again?
Yes, they should be able to do that. It would be like getting a reprint of the report. But
okay,
it will just be the report that they originally requested.
Just the PDF?
Yeah.
Okay. That'd be interesting, though, to find out if they took the old, if they took the initial MBTI Complete before the college form came out, if their ID number will take them back in. But probably not. It doesn't make sense, just because of the nature of this product. It's a very unique product.
Yes.
Okay. Other questions? Karen?
Yeah, Wendy asked, is this a good assessment for juniors or seniors in high school who are applying to college?
Wendy, you may be asking about the MBTI in general, and my answer is yes. gosh, I'm in a difficult situation because I certainly want to promote the product. But I think with high school students, I do as much as I can in person. I'd much rather have a regular MBTI report and help them to explore type through activities and through discussion and through reading and study and assignments. Personally, I don't think I'd use MBTI Complete with high school students, but what comes to mind is last summer I did a presentation on the MBTI in summer school at the local college, and they were all high school bridge students. They were all seniors who were going to the community college. And I met with them 3 times. We did a lot around type, and we used the regular MBTI profile. But what happened was their parents called me and wanted to take the MBTI. And of course, you can't just say, here's one, take it. And I was able to give them a link to take the MBTI Complete so that they could take it themselves and verify their type themselves. That was really a fun thing. That was really a fun thing. The College Career Center actually ended up inviting parents to come in to a group session to talk about type and college decision making. It turned into a very interesting activity. And Jack or Jim, if you've had experience with people who've used MBTI Complete with high school students, maybe you could say something. I just haven't.
No, not at the high school level. That is not been something I've seen.
Yeah, this report though is so simplified and so targeted. It might be helpful for college seniors to see, to talk about what college is going to be like for them. I could see that. But I'm not sure. I've got to get a little bit more experience first before I say.
Do you have time for another, Judy? Judy?
Sure, let's take, I'm just looking at what, yes, I'm sorry, I muted to drink some water. Go ahead. Yeah,
it's okay.
Sure,
from Barbara. In your group debrief, do you think it most helpful to have people of the same type together or mixed type groups?
I like a mixed type group as a whole group, and then I break them into type-alike groups to do activities, and then they report out to the larger group and compare and contrast. I can't imagine a whole group of just ENFPs or ISTJs. Or I mean, I think the diversity. You start with the diversity because it's all about the appreciation of differences. One more, and then we should probably go on because we're going to look at step 2, which is a little bit more complex.
Great. Let's see here. I'm trying to go through. We got a lot in. Let's see. Okay, and this one's going to keep coming up. From Paul, when will the MBTI Complete and the new MBTI Profile Interpretive Report become available? What is the additional cost of the MBTI Complete? Or the cost of the MBTI Complete?
Okay, the MBTI Interpretive Report and Profile are already in use. And I'm going to let Jack and Jim respond to the questions about MBTI Complete, which is this interactive process that we've been looking at.
Great, thank you, Judy. So for the MBTI Complete for college, we do not have a definitive release date yet. It should be sometime later this year. Once we do have a release date for that, though, everybody who's attending the webinar, we will update you as to the release date of that, and you'll be the first to know that it's available. And our product development team has not yet set a price for the Complete for college, so I can't speculate on that point yet. But it will be in an acceptable price range.
Okay, so we're not ready. And actually, we're previewing something here. You're getting you just got a preview look at something that no one else has seen. And what we're hoping is that we get you excited enough about it to think about it during spring and summer, so that if you wanted to implement it, it would be ready next year, next academic year.
Exactly.
Okay, Karen, I'm going to move forward with the step 2, and then we'll pause again a little bit later. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
And when I was putting this together, it seemed like a good place to mention 2 references for academic advisors and career counselors that I can't imagine being without. This is the recently released second edition of the MBTI type tables for occupations. Karen, can you hear me?
I can hear you, yeah.
We just had a musical interlude.
Yes, I just heard that.
Was that type related?
I guess
it wasn't
so.
on my wasn't on my end. Okay. This is the second edition of MBTI type tables for occupations, and it includes 404 occupations from the CPP data bank. The samples are amazing. Samples ranging from slightly over 100 people in an occupation to some samples that have over 20,000 people in an occupation. The total sample is almost 500,000 people that were collected during this decade, between 2002 and 2011. And the type tables in this book make two very important points: that different types are attracted to different occupations and career fields, providing extensive validity for the concept of personality differences, but also that there's a place for every type in every occupation. And a lot of people don't know how to read these type tables, so I thought I'd show us one that might be interesting to look at. This is the type table of career counselors, and this happens to be 650 career counselors. It's how the data are actually presented. Notice that two types are highlighted. ENFP is the modal or most frequently occurring type in this sample of 650. INFJ is the most significant. What that means is that it has the highest representation in the sample compared to the national representative sample. So there are more INFJs who are in the field of career counseling than would be predicted from the number of INFJs in the population in general. But notice that every single type is represented in the sample. And I see this in our online certification program all the time. ENFP is the most frequently occurring type in our online program. And our online people are all career counselors. And as of today, ENFJ is the most significant with the highest self-selection ratio. And RN is 1,024, the most recent data that we have. It's pretty clear from these data that there's something about the occupation of career counselor that attracts NF types. You can see here that 41% of the sample of the career counselors are NF types. Now, there's another book that's similar that's been out for a little while that presents college majors in much the same way. And this sample is over 110,000 full-time students in the CPP data bank. These are traditional age students. And the same two important points stand out: that different types are attracted to different majors, and that there's a place for every type in every major. And I just pulled psychology to show you. You can find your type and how it might relate to a psychology major. They didn't have a graduate major in counseling, so I couldn't pull that. And once again, there's something about psychology that attracts NF types. Lots of them major in psychology. Now with this, we're going to leave the step one, which is the regular four-letter type version of the MBTI, and we're going to take a look at the step two. And the step two is a different form of the MBTI instrument. It's not new, but it's also not used very often on college campuses. And I wanted to show it to you, to talk through it a little bit and see if you see some uses for it. Now the step one is all about what people of the same type have in common with each other. For instance, all ISTJ types seem to really like precision, and they really like accuracy, and they want to get it right. And all ENFP types seem to really like empowering others to find personal meaning in their own lives. Now the step two is all about individual distinctions within each type. For instance, some ISTJ types are imaginative and conceptual. Ultimately, they want to get it right, but their way of getting there is more typical of types who prefer intuition. And some ENFP types are concrete and practical. Ultimately, they want to empower others, but their way of getting there is more typical of sensing types. The Step II is most helpful with college students when a preference pair is unclear. The facet combinations not only explain why the dichotomy is unclear, but provide useful clues for type development. Now, to generate a Step II report, students take Form Q of the MBTI. It has 144 items versus the 93 on Form M. We're going to look at the Step II Interpretive Report, which presents the four-letter type first with PCIs. So when you're using Form Q, the overall type is verified. This four-letter type is verified just like it would be with any other form of the MBTI, and it's verified before discussing the Step II facets. This particular student has ENFJ preferences. Each Step I dichotomy or preference pair has 5 facets. They're more or less subscales of the dichotomies, but we call them facets because we don't talk about scales with the MBTI. And you can tell there are hundreds of facet combinations. Each combination adds to the uniqueness of the person within the overall type, and we'll look at a couple. Going over each of the facets is impossible within our time frame today, so I picked a few that might be particularly relevant for career development issues and questions. Here are the 5 facets for extroversion versus introversion that appear in the interpretive report. And we know that this student has an overall preference for extroversion because extroversion is highlighted at the top. She has 4 in-preference facets and 1 mid-zone. That's that little nub there for active, reflective that's in the middle. Facet values range from 0 to 5 in each direction. 0 to 1 in each direction is considered mid-zone. So it's a facet that's in the middle. The facets for each section, for each overall preference pair are interpreted. They're interpreted with in-preference comments if the facet is in preference, out of preference if they're out of preference, and mid-zone if they're mid-zone. This particular person is in the mid-zone on the active reflective facet, which is under this EI that we looked at. She's equally comfortable actively participating in learning or quietly observing, and enjoys both classroom and distance learning formats. She wants her learning environment to allow her to learn new things from others, but also to learn on her own. Each one of the facets can actually be used to help to describe an ideal work environment for students. Traditional original says a lot about the kind of employer that might be appealing. We're looking at one of this person's SN facets now, the traditional original, and then I'll show her all of the SN facets to show you all of her SN facets together. Her original score of 2 suggests that she values uniqueness in people and ideas, and she would most likely prefer working for an employer who encourages change and where it's okay to be different. I just worked with an ISFJ who had an original facet, and she's working at a bank. And this was the key point in the discussion, was that she was an original ISFJ and was not encouraged to be different with her banking employer. Now this person's overall type is ENFJ, so it's not surprising that she scores in the her results are in the original direction. Now here are all of the SN facets taken together. We can see that her overall preference, SN preferences for intuition, her preference clarity index was actually a clear 24. Her maximum abstract score suggests that she likes to read between the lines of what sensing takes in. Her maximum imaginative score reflects her liking for ingenuity, her resourcefulness in new situations. Her mid-zone practical conceptual score suggests that she probably enjoys alternating between ideas and their applications. We see this a lot with NJ types, by the way. Her maximum theoretical score reflects seeing almost everything as fitting into a pattern of theoretical context. And her original score, which we saw before, suggests that she likes to show her own originality, but she may also identify somewhat with established ways of doing things. Here are the TF facets for our sample ENFJ. These facets are all in preference. I pulled out a couple of these to talk about. The first of these facets, logical empathetic, is the student's ideal decision-making style, how she wants to make decisions. This often reflects parents' values in college students. The second of these facets, reasonable compassionate, is the student's actual decision-making style. This is how decisions are implemented. So she is both empathic and compassionate. Maintaining harmony is her strongest value when making decisions, and that's how she acts. Just as an example of the opposite, my type is INTJ, and I happen to have an empathetic, reasonable decision-making style. So I'm empathetic on this first one, but I go in the other direction on the second one. So I'm the way that it shows up on my report is an empathetic INTJ. The way that plays out is that my ideal is to be empathetic, and I'm a trained counselor. That's what goes on internally when making a decision. My training tells me that's how I should be. That's what should be leading. But when I actually act, I clearly act in the reasonable direction. That's the TJ in my type. Now this shows you what's referred to as an OOPS, an out of preference scale. And this is an ENFJ type. But you see that emergent bar going in the other direction. So she's an ENFJ type with an emergent facet and a mid-zone early starting pressure prompted facet. She's systematic, planful, and scheduled, but she's somewhat motivated by last-minute pressures and is more adaptable than methodical. This happens to be a combination that we see quite often, again, in NJ types, where the J is pulling them towards the systematic, the planful, the scheduled, but the N pulls them a little bit towards the emergent and sometimes even the pressure prompted. What I notice sometimes with this combination is that the person will waver back and forth between J and P during the initial feedback, and this explains why. Now this is our ENFJ student's unique ENFJ type, which is presented at the end of the Step 2 report. She's identified as an emergent ENFJ. That's the only bar that's higher than 1 in the opposite direction of the overall preference. I thought I'd show you one way of using Step 2 results that's kind of fun. And I set it up in career exploration classes this way. I suggested them that they're considering a career move or they've just been made an offer. And we asked them this question. And we asked them to look at the facets on their Step 2 and answer this question based on what their report says. And what they have to come up with are 5 questions that they would have to have answered before accepting the position. And it's really interesting what comes up. Jean Kumaro actually presents some samples she has a binder for facilitators on how to use the Step 2. These are typical sensing questions related to each facet, intuition questions, thinking questions, and feeling questions. And sometimes I'll actually give them a worksheet that has these questions on it and have them discuss in type different groups which questions they have to have answered before they accept a job offer. And it's really fun to put 2 intuition types in the same group that have different Step 2 facets and have them talk about it, or any of the other ones as well. I'm wondering, Karen, should we pause here? Are there any specific Step 2 questions that have come in before we show them the combined report?
Yeah, I'm just kind of going through, and this would be a good clarification question as well. But from Cecile, can one take the step 2 without taking the other MBTI assessments first?
Yes, when you take the step 2, it's Form Q, and the step 1 is built into it. So it gives you your step 1 profile before you even start with all of these step 2 facets. So yeah, and that's the way I treat it usually, and you can generate the career report and any other reports from the step 2 results, but it will just include, if you're generating a career report, for instance, from the MBTI Complete, it will be based, from the step 2, it will be based just on the 4-letter type. But yeah, you can start with the step 2 just like you would with the step 1.
Great. And Chrissy tells us, my report indicates a preference for introversion. However, the bars on 2 facets are out of preference and none are in preference. This doesn't make sense.
I know. It's actually possible for a person to have an overall preference in one direction and have all 5 facets in the other direction. And it's because there are more items on the step 2. The overall preference is much bigger. It's much more comprehensive. It's much more inclusive than the sum of the 5 facets. And Jean has a wonderful diagram in her binder that I probably should have asked to use in this presentation, but think of EI as a very, very big space with lots of stuff in it. And 5 of those stuff things are the 5 facets, but there's a lot more going on too, and that's what has taken your preference in the I direction. I suspect, though, that the clarity isn't too high. The PCI is probably slight or moderate if all of the facets are mid-zone or in the other direction. But in your case, you just said 2 facets. That's not uncommon. I have 2 JP facets in the P direction, and I'm a clear J. That's the uniqueness.
Great. Okay, so Kelly says, so just to clarify, mid-zone means someone is equally comfortable as opposed to slight, which means someone who is not as clear on their preference?
We're talking about step 2 now. We're not talking about step 1. And on the step 2, the mid-zone score is that they pull from both poles. I'm not equally comfortable makes me nervous because I have to ask to find out if they're equally comfortable. But they answer the questions like they're pulling from both poles of the facet. But an overall preference for slight on the 4 dichotomies, the 4 letters, that's lack of clarity, which isn't a bad thing. It's just how it is.
Great. Deidre comes in, she asks, could step 2 results show why step 1 result is slight? Because there is a split between the 5 facets in step 2?
You bet. You bet, exactly. That's what goes on with my TF. But when I verify my 4 letters, I verify the T. But it's usually slight to, well, in the beginning it was very slight. Now that I know enough about type, it's hard to say. But sure, your facets will pull you towards the middle, and it helps. I think it's very, I don't want to use the word comforting, but somebody give me the language. I can't think of the word. It just feels good to the student or the client when they've looked at a slight preference, maybe they're a little bit unclear, and then they see this 1 or 2 facets that are in the other, and it's, oh, I get it. I really am in ENTP, but I do a lot of practical, concrete stuff. One more, and then we're going to do the combined report, and then we'll stop at the end for more questions, okay?
Great. Here's actually, I wanted to share this from Dr. Jeff Hart. He tells us, overall, I use step 1 for large student groups, classes, and step 2 for individual students or small seminar intern groups. Yes, I would agree that step 2 is the next step that goes beyond the 4-letter type more in depth. Some students request this after taking step 1, Form M. Out of preference facets help them to see that not all of the same 4-letter types are alike. I emphasize any letter or facet as an overall preference. I like your, oh my goodness, I just lost my spot, I'm sorry. Another question just came in as I was talking. Let's see here. I like your using the word preference. I've found that to be an important perspective.
Yeah, I agree. One complication arises if you administer Form M first, and then the student asks for the expanded Form Q, which is Step 2. They've already verified their type with Form M, so they go into Step 2 slightly predisposed. And it can bias it. My own preference, the way that I do it, is if I think that there's a possibility that we're going to be using the Step 2, I'll start with Step 2, and use just the Step 1 report, the Form M, the 4 letters, with the group work, and then I have the Step 2 facets there as backup when I'm working one-on-one. But I think it's just a matter of choice, and practitioners do it differently. There's no right or wrong there. Let's take a look at the combined report, which will only take a minute. I just want to show them the new stuff, and then we'll come back to discussion. Is that okay, Karen?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks.
This is the updated combined career report, and it's coming out very shortly, within the next month or so, and we actually haven't shown it before. It looks very much like the old one. It has 2 very important differences. I'm just going to show you some key pieces. This combined report, if you haven't seen it before, brings together top general occupational themes from the person strong with their type. It brings together personal style scales and type, and then overlapping occupations, empirical results from the strong database, and self-selection ratios from the MBTI database. The report begins with a summary of the person's general occupational themes and MBTI preferences. Here we have social, artistic, and ENFJ, and combines the 2. And when you see the report, it actually comments even further on sometimes it's a really good fit between the first theme and type, and sometimes it's not such a good fit, and the report comments on both of those. It also combines personal style scales and type. I just put a couple up here. One is work style and MBTI type. The other one is learning environment and MBTI type. I pay a lot of attention to MBTI type and EI. EI on the MBTI is the focus of energy, but it's also the source of energy. It's where you go to replenish and refill your batteries. And on the strong, the work style is literally how many hours a day do you want to work with people. It's clearly the focus. So you can have an introverted type who wants to work with people, or you can have an extroverted type who doesn't. And that's very often a key point in putting these 2 assessments together, much more so than a job title or a career field. The combined report then suggests some career fields that might bring the 2 together, and you can see there's a hyperlink here that will take you to ONET. And then up to 10 overlapping occupations are listed, and these are hyperlinked to ONET. In the world of data, these combined occupations are called double hits. What that means is that the student scored in a similar range on the strong, and their type is naturally attracted to the occupation. So you've got the empirical evidence, and you've got the natural attraction of the type. And these are also hyperlinked, so if we click on social worker, for instance, it goes right to social worker on ONET and provides the opportunity to explore social work with all the information in ONET. And at the very end, just close your eyes. At the very end, it also links to related occupations. So the 10 double hit occupations on the combined report can take you to many more. After the double hit occupations, the combined occupations, up to 20 additional occupations are listed. By the way, on the double hits, we have more this time. This is all new data. What we've incorporated, I'm going to go back a slide, I'm sorry. I meant to say this before because it's a key point. The strong was updated last spring with new occupational scales. All of that data, as well as new MBTI data, have been combined so that we can now get up to 10 combined occupations. There used to be only 9. They might be different than they were the last time you scored a combined report because the strong occupations have changed. And after these occupations, 20 additional occupations are listed. Some of these may be double hits, but they also might have appeared on either the Strong or the MBTI. The report ends as it did previously with 4 career development strategies: starting a career, changing careers, enriching careers, and how to achieve work-life balance. And takes the results from both assessments and applies to each of these areas. When I'm using this with students, I'm going to focus on the area that applies to them specifically. For instance, these are questions to ask based on social and ENFJ about whether a career field is a good match. And then the report ends with suggestions for how to keep motivated. Again, based on, this happens to be based on risk-taking and MBTI type, which is kind of interesting. There's several sections on the on career exploration and motivation. Now, many of us have been using the combined report for a long time, and I had a lot to do with its development, and realize that on college campuses it seems to be one way that we can really cut to the information we need to with students fairly quickly when we don't have as much time as we used to go through lengthy interpretations of each assessment. But the combined report was designed to be a second-level report. So the students should have a verified type and verified general occupational themes on their Strong before this report is generated. Well, that's all I'm going to say about the products. Again, balloon should go up, and so CPP is really excited about celebrating 70 years of type. Karen, am I correct that the website went up, the MBTIparty.com website went up this morning?
Yeah, you're right. It launched this morning, and we've already had some people submit their user stories because we're actually collecting some, basically a story about MBTI, your personal, anything that you want to share, and we're giving away some goodies, so check it out.
Oh, fun. I haven't had a chance to look at it yet, but I look forward to it. You also have a chance for a 10% discount on your purchase of MBTI and Strong materials. Make sure and make your purchases before March 29th. The promotion code you need is EXPERT313, standing for March 2013. I'll have this up at the end too, so you can write it down. There are many online discussion groups. CPB education team and the Strong Interest Inventory practitioners also follow both the Strong and CPP on Facebook and Twitter, and then the education blog and Pinterest. Is that how we're pronouncing that now? Or Karen, that's your new Pinterest, is that right?
And if you're not on it, I'm sure you're going to get hooked. So it's a fun site.
It's fun, really fun. The next webinar is on professional networking, and we're going to talk about how different types can network effectively. I also want to mention GS does one public Strong certification program every year in Lake Tahoe in June. It's always same time, same place. We have a few more openings in it. The early registration closes April 1st. Most people do register before April 1st, June 10th to the 13th. This is our 21st year. It's a super 4-day program, and our website is there if you want to follow up. And most of you know by this time that if you've attended this webinar through to the end, you're eligible for 1.5 NBCC approved clock hours and MBTI Master Practitioner credit. If you haven't already requested your certificate, make sure and do that before March 29th as well. And if you want to take the MBTI assessment online and experience MBTI Complete, the link is mbticomplete.com. It costs a little under $50 to do it. The website is here. You won't get the student report, the college report yet. With this, it's the standard MBTI Complete report that's that we've been using for the past few years. And I'll leave this up just while we're answering some additional questions that might have come in so that people can catch those links. And these are, this is Jim and Jack. They've both been chiming in during this webinar, and here are their faces. Karen, we've got a few minutes. Are there some questions that you think we might take in the next 5 minutes?
Yes, I have a few, so hopefully we can get to them. Let's hear from Elizabeth. Do you also spend time verifying Step 2 results?
Well, it's more interpreting than verifying. I don't call it verifying. Certainly in the discussion, they'll say, I agree with that or I don't, but it's not the extensive verification process that we go through with Step 1.
Now here's another from Sarah. When first working with a student, what indicators would make you think you needed to use the Form Q versus Form M?
I always, in my work, I have the opportunity to talk with students before I administer assessments. If I'm picking up that they just don't have a clue about anything, I'll start with Step 2. Usually, in a student situation where it's often dictated to me in a college setting which one I'm going to use, but certainly when I'm working one-on-one. And by not having a clue, I mean, you ask the typical questions. What do you like to do? What classes did you like the best? What was high school like? What activity? And if you're seeing that there's a lot of indecision and going back and forth, I'll score for a Step 2 right off the bat if I can. That's a personal opinion, though.
Thanks. Another from Patricia. This new combined report requires the person to take both inventories at the same time?
Oh, good, really good question. You can get that report, yes, by taking them both at the same time, or if you already have their type, you have them take a strong, and then when you score for the combined report, you enter the verified type that you already have. So the answer is no, they don't have to take them both at the same time. You order different products, and Jack and Jim, you might want to clarify on this because it always confuses me, but they're different product numbers. If they're I don't even want to go into it. Jack, maybe you can. When they purchase the MBTI certificate, how they purchase the strong with it or not?
Yeah.
When they purchase, not the certificate, the report.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if you already have an individual's verified 4-letter type, you're able to run, like you said, you're able to run the combined report. If you, for example, and I think these cases are rare where individuals already have both verified type and the general occupational themes for a student, but if you do already have those two pieces, you are able to purchase the combined report as a standalone product.
As long as the strong is already in the system.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's the key.
Right. I think those instances are rare. Sometimes people do have verified type, and they just need to bring in the strong in order to generate the combined report. In which case, we do offer a bundle where we sell the strong profile or the strong college profile alongside the strong and MBTI combined report, and that is more commonly what occurs.
Yeah.
Does that answer the question?
Okay. Yeah, I think so. The key point is that they don't have to retake the MBTI.
That's correct.
You do have to have a strong in the system. And with the strong, you really want to interpret a strong within 6 months of it being taken. In fact, in our certification program, we have a 2-week limit because you want the student to remember taking the assessment before you score it. You certainly don't want to be generating a combined report for a senior when they took the assessments during freshman orientation. Okay, anything else, Karen, that's standing out?
Yes, let's see. I've seen a couple questions come in regarding verification for the combined report, so I'll ask Mary's question. In the combined report, is there an option to verify the type?
No, you want to verify type first because you want to use the verified type for the combined report. Now, if you have generated a combined report before type has been verified, which isn't typical, but if you have, and then the student verifies a different type, you can rescore it for a verified type once without an additional charge. I hope that's correct. Jack will jump in if it isn't.
Jim is nodding in consent.
Jim is okay. Can't see the nod. All right.
Okay, here's another from Joanne. I'm sorry if I pronounced that incorrectly. When I took the MBTI training, level 2 training was not included. How can I get up to speed to be able to utilize MBTI Step 2?
I believe that CPP offers Step 2 workshops.
Yes,
and
Sorry.
Go ahead. Go ahead,
Yes,
Jack.
that is correct. We do have a one-day Step 2 workshop that is usually used to be as more of a refresher course rather than being used as a certification proper for the Step 2. But
Okay.
anybody who's interested in learning more about those refresher courses, please feel free to contact me at jpowers@cpp.com, and I'll send you out the dates that we have. If we have enough time at the end of the webinar, and if there's interest, I can let you know where those are occurring this year, and I'll get to work looking at that right now.
Okay. I know that APT also offers some Step 2. We have a Step 2 certification program online as well with gsconsultants.net, and it's a follow-up to Step 1 certification. We happen to separate Step 1 and Step 2 certifications, and ours is specifically for career counselors, which isn't quite as general as the CPP one. CPP one covers more bases. Ours is specifically career. Anything else, Karen?
Here's a very good one from Janine. What are the major differences between the first and second editions of the MBTI type tables?
Expanded samples, so more people in the samples, and expanded occupations. They doubled the occupations because they have the data bank had expanded from the original one. For instance, the modal type, not the modal type, the most significant self-selection ratio for career counselors changed from ENFJ to INFJ, and it changed because the sample grew. It's much thicker. It takes up much more room on my desk.
Yes, it does. Okay, this one had come in from Tonya earlier this morning. Are there any statistics that show how helpful knowing type is in choosing a college major? And any helpful tips on helping a student who is having difficulty choosing his best fit type? The one in mind is either ENTP or ENTJ.
I can't quote statistics on it. It's kind of a heuristic principle. It's kind of common sense that if you know who you are, choosing a major is going to be more. It's going to be easier. What I focus on in choosing a major are the middle two letters, the heart of type. I don't think the ENTP, ENTJ at the point of major choice makes a huge difference. We talked about this actually in the last webinar, that the middle two letters are likely to point to the career field. The orientations, EI and JP, point to the specific job, and specific jobs aren't that important when in choosing a field. I hope that helps. I wish I could give you information, but career development journals always talk about the linkage between self-knowledge and decision-making, and there's a high correlation.
Thanks.
Probably one more, and then we're going to have to wrap, I think. But you're in charge of the clock, I think.
Yes, we have a couple minutes. Let's see here. I'm trying to see which one we'll cover most. We still have a few more questions. Let's see here. We got one from Sharina. I was always under the impression that Strong was best for undergrad students. I work with master and PhD degree students. Is Strong appropriate for them?
I use the Strong across the lifespan. So yeah, the Strong is very effective with graduate students in identifying specific areas within a career field, specific jobs, and the interpretation of the Strong for adults is different from the interpretation of the Strong for college and high school students. We focus on different scales and different combinations of scales. So it's absolutely appropriate.
Great.
I have a little bias, I know.
And just one more question from Sarah. Where do the Step 2 career decision-making questions come from? Are they actual FAQs?
The career decision-making questions that I had on the slide, it sounds like she's referring to those.
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, and those came from Jean Kummero's resource using the Step 2 results. It's Jean Kummero and Naomi Koink are the authors of the Step 2, and there are two resources. And if I I haven't titled them correctly. I had it on the slide. One is using your Step 2 or understanding your Step 2 results, and the other one is a binder for facilitators and trainers for using the Step 2 in various situations. So those questions came out of that.
Great, thank you.
Is that it? I think we're probably at the end of our time. I could stay here all day.
Yes, so we run out of time, but thank you everybody for attending today. And I know there have been a lot of questions about when these products are coming out, the dates, prices. We will actually put you on a special list. We'll let you know first when these come out, so we'll be sending you more information such as the sample reports, pricing, all of that, so you'll have that. So look out for emails from us. And thank you so much for everybody attending. A shout out for Neela and Michelle for tweeting with us today. We really appreciate that. And Judy, thank you for sharing your knowledge and expertise with us today. So today's webinar is part of an ongoing series. Our next webinar is scheduled for April 25th, and we'll cover the topic, is professional networking just for extroverts? To register, you can visit our website at cpp.com/askanexpert. We hope you'll be able to join us in April, and thank you all for attending, and have a wonderful day. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.